Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm privileged to welcome a very senior and respected leader from the US, Mr. Mark Funkhouser. Mark, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. Mark is the president of Funkhouser and Associates. He's the former mayor of Kansas City, Missouri during the Great Recession, and he's a municipal finance expert. So, Mark, let me start by asking you about your own early life and experiences and what led you to pursue a career in public service that led you to becoming the mayor of Kansas City.
Well, it was all a series of accidents, actually, but I grew up in West Virginia in a very working class family. And I was an aggressive young guy. I got in a lot of fights and that sort of thing. And at some point, I learned that I could do better fighting with words and ideas than I could with my fists. I began to write and that sort of thing. I accidentally stumbled into politics, political science as an undergraduate because that just happened to be where an advisor had scheduled my classes as a freshman, and I discovered that I liked it. The rules, so to speak, that I didn't like and that I thought kept folks like me down, were structured by government. If you want to change the rules, you got to be part of the government.
Well said. Well said. And then what took you into becoming the mayor of Kansas or fighting the election? I'm assuming it was an election.
Oh, yes, it was an election. Well, again, that sort of series of accidents went along. I got a job, again, took a civil service test and wound up in a job working with physically handicapped individuals for the government, for the state of Pennsylvania. And I liked it. And I thought, this is something I wanted to pursue. So I got a master's degree in social work and wound up teaching at a small college, teaching social science. Met the woman who I later married and left the college and was looking for a job. And a fellow offered me a job with the state auditor's office in Tennessee. They were beginning to hire social scientists in addition to the accountants. I took that job and I discovered I really liked that. As a social worker, I could work with a group of individuals and help them do better in the world. But as a performance auditor for the state government, I could change the system by which those services were delivered and have a much larger impact. To succeed at that, I decided that I needed an MBA in accounting and finance. I got that. And then it occurred to me that I could have more impact and it would be more interesting and more fun to work for local government. So I applied for a series of city jobs and I wound up getting the job as the city auditor of Kansas City. I did that for 18 years and it was in the 2004, it was clear to me that there would be a Great Recession. And it was also clear to me that nobody in Kansas City government knew or cared. And I began to plot and plan. And in the meantime, I had acquired a PhD in urban sociology and political science. And so I threw my hat into the ring, ran for mayor, and a very unusual campaign because I was, you can imagine, so as the city auditor, when I decided I was running for mayor, it was met with derision.
Correct.
This bean counter thing is, but we surprised them. All those years of writing and talking, I can do well in an argument, and that's what a political campaign is. It's an argument. And we didn't have any money. It takes about $1 million to get to be mayor of Kansas City, and we ultimately raised about 385,000. So spent about 2 or 3 to 1. But my wife managed my campaign, and she figured out how to package me, so to speak, in a way that it was not just the sort of negative Dr. No auditor. She's written a series of books about that. The second book just launched in May 24th of this year, and it's about our campaign. And one of the things that she did is my name Funkhouser is odd, and my closest friends and her refer to me as Funk. And she branded me, so to speak, in the campaign. And your podcast is a brand culture. This was all about branding me.
Correct.
As the Funk, and making it, softening my image as a hard-nosed financial guy. And so her book is called "Come On, Funk, Move Your Ass."
Wow.
And it's funny, but it's also a very intimate look, insider look at what it takes to raise money, run a campaign, and ultimately win.
Wow. Well, maybe I'm going to reach out to her through you and speak to her about what went into making Funk win. That's fantastic. What a story that would be. But coming back, Mark, you have been an advocate for transparency and accountability in government. What initiatives did you implement in Kansas City? Because my experience with governments is that they're not transparent and they're not accountable.
That's unfortunately often true. Of course, the purpose of auditing, particularly performance auditing, is transparency and accountability. And so for 18 years, I had been looking at one program after another and examining that program. Part of the campaign was sort of revisiting each of those audits and looking at themes like public safety and transportation and water and sewer. One of the ways in which I decided what to audit was that we did regular surveys of the residents of Kansas City, statistically valid surveys. And we looked at those areas where they deemed very important and they were very unsatisfied. And so we targeted our areas, our audits, on things that people cared about. And by the time I ran for mayor, I knew where the pain points were, what citizens were unhappy about, what they wanted done differently. A big part of that was the way in which Kansas City and many cities in the U.S. Pursued economic development was essentially corporate welfare. We would bribe companies to locate and pass the bill on to the taxpayers.
Correct. Correct.
When I got elected, sure enough, the recession happened just as we anticipated it would. And so I spent a lot of time just working on the finances, keeping Kansas City solvent. The city left the Great Recession in better financial shape than it was when it went in. We had a larger fund balance. We had improved our bond rating. But that was by, for example, not doing the tax giveaways and being careful about where we spent the money. One of the things that I told residents over and over is, you got to be smart with the money. People would say that the city was broke, and I would say that's not true. We're going to spend $1.3 billion this year. We just have to be smart about how we spend our money. The bean counter image and the auditor image, I would come back at people with something like, you can't take care of the people if you don't take care of the money.
Correct.
When government services go badly, the people that are hurt are the most vulnerable.
Absolutely.
The well-off, they can have their own police force, they can have their gated community, they can have private tutors for their kids. It's the regular folks who get hurt.
Correct.
My campaign slogan was a city that works for regular folks. And so that was, much of it was just sort of paying the bills, reining in the crony capitalism that we were calling economic development, and preserving the fund balance, and then working on one of the biggest issues that people were concerned about was violent crime. Kansas City was at that time third in the nation in violent crime. We were able, by focusing on that issue, to bring the violent crime rate down to a 20-year low.
Wow.
And keep it low while I was in office.
Amazing.
We had another issue that they were very concerned about was the schools and the school district. I convened the superintendents of the various school districts in Kansas City. That had never happened. The mayor had never called them all together. The mayor has no formal authority over the school districts. Those are separate little governments. And I asked them about their experiences with the city and what they needed to have to be able to do better. And it was basic city services. One school superintendent said, your water main breaks, and we have to close the school. There's no water, we can't flush the toilets, we have to close the school for 2 or 3 days while you fix the water main. Another superintendent said, you allow violent crime right across the street from my school, and so on. And it became very clear that residents were concerned about the schools. Schools believed that the city was not a good, reliable partner in providing services that allowed them to do their job. So I created an initiative called Schools First, where I said we would focus our limited resources on those areas around the schools and make the neighborhood around the school work better.
Fascinating. The other question that I've often asked, leaders like yourself who are in public service, how did you balance the needs of so many different stakeholders, residents, businesses, community organizations, while making policy decisions? Because there must have been lots of pulls and pressures.
There are lots of pressures, and what I believe is that you have to have priorities, and you have to stick to those priorities. If you do everything, you get nothing accomplished. You have to focus. But it is, I encourage young people to run for office. If you don't like the way things are done, throw your hat in the ring. But it is a grueling job. I came out of the job with a lot more empathy for elected officials. Basically, your day starts at 7 in the morning at some Rotary Club or Kiwanis Club or somebody breakfast, and it goes until about 11 at night, because you've gone to some dinner, social occasions like football games, basketball games, baseball games. You're expected to show up. It was absolute full, and it's, of course, it's 7 days a week, and you never know when things happen, there's a tornado, there's a police shooting,
Correct.
there are things that, whatever you thought the agenda was for today, that's no longer the agenda. And yet when you're on the street and when you're with people, you have to be smiling and pleasant and happy, and you can't be gruff or rude. So it's very hard. And so naturally, when you're trying to balance all those competing concerns,
Correct.
somebody is going to be unhappy.
Correct.
And it never. I now understand that there is no mayor out there who doesn't have a lot of people very unhappy with him or her, because you just can't do it all.
Correct. Some constituency will be unhappy. You're so right.
Yeah.
But what would you say, Mark, were some of your proudest achievements during your term?
Well, I was very proud of the financial thing, that we were able to poise the city. So when the recession was over, the city essentially sprang forward. It was in good shape financially, and it was ready to take off. That was a big deal to me. The other thing, the crime, focusing on crime and essentially saving people's lives. I mean, there were, fewer homicides, fewer shootings, that sort of thing. Those were the things that sort of mattered the most to me. And part of the fiscal thing was that the city's financial policies were virtually non-existent. There are good practices. As an auditor, I knew what those good practices were, and we were able to enact them. The way that financial policy is enacted in the city government is it requires a resolution or an ordinance, and it requires a vote of the city council, and we were able to get those policies passed, and the city continues now, 10, 15 years after I left office, it continues to do well with those financial policies in place. One of my better moments happened long after I left office, when the current mayor, Quentin Lucas, saw me at a public event and came up to me and thanked me for putting the city in the position it was able to thrive now.
Fascinating. My next question to Mark is on the role of technology in governing, cities. What are your perspectives on how technology is beginning to change governance of large cities and, complex cities?
Technology is at the center of almost everything that is being done now. Cities and governments, particularly local governments, have been laggards in the adoption of technology. And then with the pandemic, suddenly it was no longer sort of optional. And they really responded well. The federal government with the CARES Act really helped with technology adoption.
Correct.
And then the American Rescue Plan. And so that cities are now really adopting technology at a rapid clip. You have to, can't do paper processing, things like the hiring process, the purchasing process, the permitting and licensing process. Those things all have to be digitized, and they have to be located in the cloud. And that is, you just can't do business. Although, I recently was working with a city that was still issuing paper checks. That's just terrible. You can't do that. So and in the United States, the local government sector, like every other sector, took a tremendous hit during the pandemic in terms of staffing losses. But whereas the rest of the economy has recovered the staffing that it lost, local government has not. Now have, for example, something like 67 local governments got their bond ratings reduced because they did not produce their annual financial report on time because they don't have enough accountants to do it. If you're a young person out there in the United States and you're looking for work, local governments are hiring desperately, particularly skills like accounting and finance.
Amazing, amazing. So I have time for two more questions for you. My next question is that what role should local governments play in addressing the challenges the world is facing, like climate change or sustainability?
Well, local governments are on the front lines of those sorts of things. If there is wildfire, if there is flood, it is right there in your community. So there are two sides of that coin. One is reducing greenhouse gases, and cities are making that a priority, and they are working on that. But the other is reacting to the ravages of climate change, which are very significant already here now. And I've written about this. When I was the publisher of Governing Magazine, I wrote about 250 columns for the magazine. And now my newsletter, we regularly write about issues impacting local government. And the issue with regard to climate change and resiliency, the response to floods and so forth, is that unlike a lot of costs, these are not costs that can be sort of kick the can down the road. If there is a landslide because of excessive rain and it wipes out a chunk of roadway, you can't tell residents, well, we'll get to that eventually. You're out of office. So it's a whole new category of costs. It's a different kind of cost, and it's significant. One city, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, there are 3 rivers come together there, and it's very steep, very hilly, and there has been a tremendous amount of rain. And they last year spent something like 4 times the amount they have budgeted to deal with those landslides. Storm sewers and that sort of thing. Much of the water infrastructure in the United States has been allowed to deteriorate since the 70s. And that's one of the reasons why the bipartisan infrastructure plan that President Biden was able to shove through was so desperately needed. We've been talking about infrastructure for quite a while, but we're finally starting to spend some money on it. But those things, when we talk about water issues, it's drinking water, wastewater, but stormwater is a big issue. The amount of rainfall that is coming, it's in short bursts of tremendous amounts of rain, and dealing with that. Storm sewers that were built in the 50s are not adequate.
Absolutely. And that seems to be a problem all over the world. And my last question to you, Mark, and I really wanted to ask you that when you look back at your time in office, is there anything you would have done differently? And what would your advice be to future city leaders?
What I would have done differently, I would have been even more focused, but I also would have been slower to move. I've written advice to mayors, and one of the things is that there is no job like this job. You've never done this before, and you should take the first 6 months just to sort of get the feel of the machinery.
Correct.
What are the tools available to you and how do you use them?
Mm,
In my first 6 months, I said things off the cuff to the press that were not well considered.
mm,
I I've written one piece where I said the mayor's mouth is a loaded gun. You
mm,
need to be careful where you point it. Uh, and so I learned to never respond immediately, even if it's 5 minutes, to take a few moments,
mm,
consult with my staff, and say, well, I think I would say this, and they would say, no, don't say that.
mm,
Let's talk this through. So being slower to react, more
mm,
judicious,
mm,
um, would have been good.
mm,
Um, some of the some of the controversies could have been avoided,
mm.
but the most important controversies could not have. Um, the other thing, again, as I mentioned earlier, I really encourage people to run for office. If you don't like the character of the folks who are in office, there's a solution.
Mm.
Put your hat in there and do it yourself.
Correct, correct, correct. That's so well said. People say the same thing in my country as well, where they say, if you're unhappy, next elections, do two things. Number one, don't vote for the individual. And number two, put your hand up and be counted, so to speak.
Yes,
But
yes,
Mark,
absolutely.
yeah, and Mark, on that note, thank you so much for speaking to me about your absolutely incredible journey, and how you really turned your life around. And I love the way you said how you stopped talking with your fists but decided to educate yourself. That was such a powerful statement that you have made, which I think a lot of young people will listen to and will appreciate. Thank you for talking to me about all the work that you did in Kansas City. And I loved the fact that, after the recession, you actually managed the finances better than you had, and you left behind a much, much healthier city financially than what you had inherited. Thank you also for speaking to me about so many different aspects of governance and your final light to so many people. There's no job like this job. Thank you so much for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.